This segment of DelmarvaLife is brought to you by For All Seasons Behavioral Health and Rape Crisis Center.
Throughout the month of May, you'll be hearing a lot about mental health. As we've talked about before, it is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we thought it would be helpful to get back to the basics of, well, what is mental health? And for that, I'd like to welcome back Beth Ann Dorman, CEO at For All Seasons Behavioral Health and Rape Crisis Center. Beth, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
So it really is a basic question, but I think it's a good starting point. What is mental health?
Well, mental health is our social, psychological, and emotional well-being meter, and it's how we end up interacting with people. It's how it affects us in our daily lives. And so it's really on the spectrum, but it's important to know that it really is not just an operation of the brain, but it's that social, psychological, and emotional well-being and how we are feeling our life is moving when we're thinking about our mental wellness.
Yeah, which is very important. So who struggles with mental health?
Everyone.
Yep.
Everyone. You know, for years, I've been doing this work for 10 years now, and it used to be that we talked about 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 4 children will experience a mental health episode this year. What we talk about now, in addition to the folks that have a diagnosis, is we talk about the fact that 10 out of 10 people standing in a room have experienced a mental health symptom different than we did prior to COVID. And so we are really seeing that mental health is more prevalent. It's because it's more talked about, but we're also seeing people experience it and being able to say, hey, I'm really struggling, and we're watching more folks say, oh my gosh, me too. And it's really becoming a conversation.
Yeah. So what causes the problems that we struggle with?
Well, there can be some things that are neurological and biological within our system. There can also be traumas that we've experienced. And you know, when I say the word trauma, sometimes people go to the extreme of abuse or sexual assault, but it can also be as simple as not having what you need in front of you, whether it is food on the table, whether it is a car accident that you've gone through. We've all experienced trauma, and sometimes we dismiss the trauma in our life and how that continues to show up. You know, it might be a child who has lost a parent to incarceration. It might be a child who is not able to have the school supplies that they need, and they may be showing up in a different way in the classroom. That's all trauma. And so we really have to pay attention to our lens as adults when we're helping children, and also when we're working and we're interacting with other adults, that it's not a matter of what's wrong with you, but it's a matter of what's happened to you.
Yeah.
And I think especially when we think about mental health, you know, we know that we are hardwired for connection as human beings. And all that people are looking for is to be seen, heard, and valued. And if you don't have those 3 components in front of you, we don't show up as our best selves.
Yeah. So when do we know it's time to get some help?
Well, when it starts to impact our daily living, when it starts to be something, you know, you may have a bad day, you may have a stressful day, and it might be that you can get through that day, and yes, you've had a horrible day, you can go home, you can talk about it, you can meditate, you can journal, you can have a cup of tea at night. And maybe it carries through to the next day, but when it's persistent over a 2-week time period, if you're not able to move from that space of having that horrible day or being sad or working through grief, that's something to pay attention to. But we have to recognize that sometimes it's not a long-term diagnosis. It might be just an episodic diagnosis. So you might be going through something that's causing you to have stress or anxiety. Paying attention to how it's affecting our daily living, how it's affecting our ability to interact with people, and knowing that it doesn't have to be a forever. It might just be something that you have to walk through versus walking around it.
So how can we manage, like, you know, we all deal with stress and anxiety, or most of us do. How can we just manage it on a day-to-day basis?
So, you know, when kids play baseball, they practice so that when they get into the game, they have the skills they need for the real life situation. Mental health is no different. We have to think about what tools we need in our toolbox, and we have to practice. So it's about figuring out what works for you, because Lisa, what works for you might not work for me. I do a run in the morning, you might say, no way, I'm not gonna run, but I do tea at night and I say, no thanks, I don't want tea in the evening. So it's really about looking at options. Do you need to be able to work in some daily self-care? You know, so often in our society, we save the self-care for the weekend. I don't know about you, but in my world, my weekends sometimes are busier than my weekdays. So it's about giving space for self-care daily. even if it's 5 minutes. It's also about making sure that we are connecting in a way that is meaningful for us. If you're going to take a mental health day from work, do something that really fills your soul. If you're an introvert and you're not someone who thrives in big crowds, then make sure that you're connecting in small ways. Conversely, if you're an extrovert and you need that big crowd, make sure that you are intentionally working some of those things into your day. And remembering that just because someone else is trying something, you can be supportive without having to join in. So think about how we're saying yes and how we're saying no. If we're saying yes because we feel like we should versus because we want to, that can really be draining on our system. So making sure that all that we are doing is intentional, and at the end of the day, we can sit back and say, my soul is filled because of the choices I'm making.
It's okay to say no.
Absolutely.
Beth Ann Dorman with For All Seasons, thank you so much.
Absolutely.